Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining session 2 in our very special ABNY University Bootcamp series, How to Lead a Successful Political Campaign. The title of this session is How to Influence and Engage Voters, featuring Yvette Buckner and Amelia Adams. And before I pass the screen to Joy Ray, our YP steering committee member, I just want to encourage you all to drop any questions for the speakers into the chat via the Q&A function, and we will get to them at the end. So thank you all so much for joining us. And with that, I'll pass it to Joy. Oh, sorry, one quick thing. Please remember to follow and engage with us at A Better NY. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for being here. Before I get started, I just want to apologize in advance if you can hear any construction going on outside. We're all, probably in a urban area, and obviously I'm in New York City, so there's a little noise outside. My name is Joy Ray, and I want to just thank you for being here and for joining us today. I'm so happy to be representing ABNY's Young Professionals group as a member of the YP Steering Committee. In my day job, I serve as the head of operations and partnerships at New Public, an organization committed to building digital public infrastructure and healthy public online spaces. And today I'm very honored to be here to introduce our amazing presenters, Amelia Adams and Yvette Buckner, as part of the ABNY University Bootcamp. And they're going to be teaching us today about how to lead a successful political campaign by influencing and engaging voters. Just a little bit about our presenters. Amelia Adams is a native New Yorker and Babson College alumna. Ms. Adams began her career as a community organizer at Acorn and working with New York City residents to build power in communities. In 2013, she became a director of New York Communities for Change, and she later served as a senior advisor and director of community engagement for City Council Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito. And she also served as a political director, to Mayor Bill de Blasio's reelection campaign. Ms. Adams has coordinated legislative efforts by working with all levels of government, and most recently, she has effectively lobbied city and state officials on transportation, infrastructure, and criminal justice issues. Amazing. Yvette Buckner is a seasoned political strategist and analyst who began her career as a community organizer more than 20 years ago. She currently serves as the managing director at Tusk Strategies, where she oversees high-profile client campaigns involving regulatory issues ranging from transportation and technology to education and environmental protection. She is a board member at Vote Mama, an organization working to get more mothers into public office. Ms. Buckner was recently recognized by Crain's Business New York as one of their notable Black leaders and executives, and by City and State magazine as one of New York's Black women power brokers. She was also named as one of the top 50 New York lobbyists in 2020 and 2021, and provides media commentary on public policy and politics. Both Ms. Adams and Ms. Buckner serve as chair and vice chair, respectively, of 21 and 21, an an organization dedicated to electing more women into public office. They were both instrumental in helping a record number of women candidates win their primaries this year, and due to their work, next year, our New York City Council will have its first ever female majority. Incredible. I'm so delighted to be here with you both today, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm thrilled. I know Amelia is too, to have everyone here today. Thank you so much. I wanted to start off really quickly to see kind of the level of understanding and engagement in the room, since we're talking about how to influence and engage voters. How many folks know, if you could just put it in the chat, what percentage of New Yorkers vote in New York City elections in non-presidential years? And we just love to see kind of what you think that percentage looks like in the chat. What percentage of folks do you think vote in non-presidential years? Okay, we've got very low, 20%, 30%, 15 to 20%, 35%. So on average, 20. So actually, we got folks really good, precise 7.5%. That would be terrible. They are not, they're pretty low numbers, but I will say it is on average about 20 to 22%. This year we had more, we had almost 1 million voters in the June election that happened just earlier this year. And so we had about 23%, but on average it is pretty low comparatively to some other cities and states. And it's less than 1 million people that are voting in all the elections that get, decide the mayoral and the city council representatives, who are the people who are going to be doing the most work for you, because they're the people who, figure out the sanitation and police funding and safety and things like that, which we can talk a little bit more about. The second question is, what are some of the issues that resonated with folks this year? What was the big thing that really resonated with you? Was it, defund the police, or was it, safety, or, crime? I'd love to see in the chat just a couple of ideas of like what resonated with you this past election. Fiscal responsibility coming out of COVID. Yes. Other things that resonated with folks. Ranked choice voting, big, because it was a whole new system that was happening. Others, anybody, education, early childcare, there we go. Early childcare education was another one that, really struck a chord with a lot of folks, especially coming out of COVID, and parents with young children. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Housing, yes, housing, and people, especially with the moratorium that there was. And so, yes, housing is a huge one. So we're going to talk a little bit more today about how to influence and engage voters, and how issues like this really affect how candidates have to drive their messaging. And we're going to talk a little bit about the candidate and their, kind of like how they go from A to Z. And so if you can go to the next slide, Amelia, we'll talk a little bit about some things that strike chords with folks. So hopefully some of you are pretty familiar with some of these logos. I think, the way that we're looking at it is that slogans and logos really, really affect the way that people view a candidate, right? It's something that you develop very early on. And so there's certain things that are emotional logos and campaign slogans. There's some things that are just really practical ones, Smith for New York. But there's things that strike a chord with folks and that make people, it resonates and makes them feel more encouraged to learn more about the candidate. And so we want to talk a little bit more about that. And so these are just a couple of the slogans and logos that people have probably seen over the years.
And I think the next one. I think even to take a step back, people also just need to have a very, I want to say 101 understanding of government, and really understand Yvette is going to talk a little bid more about the candidate, but if you are a candidate running for local office, meaning a city council seat, and you're running and you have this platform, you should definitely understand that there's powers that you do have, and there's powers that you don't have. If you are running on a platform to raise the federal minimum wage, you should not be running for a local city council office. And, because that is a federal issue, and you should maybe think about Congress. I'm really trying to get we won't go into details of like each office, but there's roles that the state legislature plays, as well as the city council. The city council's biggest responsibility is passing the budget, approving the budget that the mayor sets, and also land use issues. So if you're trying to change land use, you shouldn't run for Congress or for a state office. So there's things that you really need to understand, whether, within each level of government. So the candidate. Oh yeah, Yvette. We're going, like, Yvette and I do this road show around all over town, so we like to go back and forth. So when you are actually presenting yourself as a candidate, it's the biggest thing is someone's like, well, who are you? Really understanding what your introduction is, what your story is, and why you're running, because people want to know why you are going to represent them and what you're going to do. So really introducing yourself into to the voters, potential voters as well. And I think really having a platform, because someone's like, okay, who are you? Where did you come from? Where'd you grow up? And what are you trying to do while you're in government? Those are like the real key things that people want to hear from you. And if you have trouble answering those questions, you need to go back to your drawing board and really, get that emotional story out to convince people why you're running and what you really want to see changed.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that is, we just saw New York City elections happen, and there was such a huge turnover. There were a bunch of open seats, but I think what people did, you had to really figure out how to stand out from the crowd. So if you're gonna, if you're a mom, if you're a parent, you're gonna want to talk to folks who you may be seeing when you're at the subway stop and you're giving out flyers and information. Like, I'm a parent as well, and this is why education is important to me. If you're a nurse, we saw a couple of nurses running for election recently. Oh, I'm a nurse, and here's why I want to see X, Y, and Z in place. You really have to figure out what connects with folks, and I think when you're doing that campaign slogan, when you're doing that messaging, AOC really, she got it right? She turned over and changed the way that elections look. And it kind of put politics on its, flipped it on its head. And so if you look at this graphic, the way that her head is looking, the way that she's, talking, she was really talking to people about social and racial justice. And, she was really getting a lot of emotion from folks, the same way that Obama did, right? He said, hope and change. It's those kind of campaign messages, those slogans that resonate with people in a different way. And I think it's really the zeitgeist of the moment, right? In the city. What was it that was important about social justice and racial justice that people were talking about in a different way than they had been in previous years? And it's so interesting because AOC's logo has actually been replicated in many different ways and formats, right? And so you're seeing a lot of city council members who, or candidates, I should say, who use very similar kind of like text and outline, and they did theirs as opposed to just the traditional red, white, and blue. My name is Joe Smith, and I'm running for council and leadership for the new century or whatever it is. You saw a very different kind of marketing way and slogan that people wanted to connect with.
And in a height of, and I know we'll talk a little bit about social media, in a time where there's so much chatter and you're inundated with information breaking through, whether it is using bright colors or something that really resonates. We like to say campaign ads are no longer just competing with campaign ads. You're also competing with, Gap or Louis Vuitton or Pampers. Really, like, there's so much things coming at you that you really have to figure out, like, your story, but also the look of it. Oh, this is me. Money, dinero, yen, and shekels. It all comes down to money, like whatever language it is, it's money. You can have you can have a really inspiring story, but if no one's hearing your story, if no one's seeing your ads, it's just going to be really, really hard for you to break out. And I think the first thing that people say, or the advice that I usually give is, one, how does your family feel about running for office, but also your network. Who can you call right now to help you raise $10 in New York City? The local races, there's so many minimums that you have to meet. You have to have a minimum of 75 in-district donors at least $10. New York City has a very, very, very generous matching funds program. There's two programs, a 6-to-1 and an 8-to-1, meaning every dollar is matched 8-to-1 up to a certain amount of dollars, which means, a lot of people have access to running for public office. years ago, the folks that were representing most of New Yorkers in the local city council just looked differently than it will be, next year, hopefully. If the 21 and 21 does their job right, we'll have the majority of women, but it's also the majority of women who are going to be in the office are women of color. So it looks different than it was many years ago, when the majority were white men, in all honesty, representing us. How else do you raise money besides going through your phone and saying, who can I call? Who my friends, my family that can give me money, especially be even better if they live in a district, your surrogates, house parties, house parties, it's fun, but it's also there for you to raise money and build out your network so that more people can actually hear about you, so that you can get some ads and, break through some of that not chaos, but like all those ads that you're being inundated with. There's also things called political action committees and independent expenditures. You probably hear things like PACs and IEs. These things are, separate. An IE is what it sounds like. It's an independent expenditure. Candidates cannot control or influence an independent expenditure. You cannot coordinate with an independent expenditure because they are operating independently. And there's some, I see that there's some examples of some of the PACs that were around. Sorry, my screen is, I'm blocking myself in my screen. Sorry, but there's PACs, political action committees, that contribute to campaigns on all levels, and then there's certain on a certain city council level, local level, you cannot take certain money from corporations and things like that. So New York City has a great and generous public financial campaign finance system.
There was a question, Amelia, about dark money, which I think we could talk about a little bit, but a lot of the things is like money, it can work for you or it can work against you sometimes. And so you always want to be trying to make sure that it works for you when you're the candidate, because depending on your stance on certain issues, whether you're progressive, you're conservative, you're moderate, there's going to be someone there's going to just be a group of people who don't necessarily feel that way. And so a lot of times people come together to do expenditures against a candidate. So you may have seen mailings where it says, don't vote for candidate X because they're going to make sure, they're going to defund the police and you'll have no police officer and crime is running rampant. And so it's going to be terrible for, if you vote for this person. Or there's going to be, groups that say, actually, we love the idea of defund the police. And so please vote for this person because they're going to make sure that social programs are available for people who have mental illness and, mental health issues. And so I think you're going to see what you see is it cuts both sides of the issue. And so you want to always be ensuring that you raise money so that you can get your message out clearly and concisely and always be able to kind of correct the record. Amelia, do you want to talk a little bit more about the dark money piece?
Sure. Sorry. It's so hard to also, but thank you for flagging that question. So I would separate. So New York City, because of the public financing, there's so many rules and restrictions that you can't give over a certain amount of money for that very reason. There's also now has gotten some sophistication. There's software. We actually did a training on this last summer. There's this training, this is software that is kind of, paired and connected to your account where you can actually put in, keywords, whether it is, baker or waiter, food industry, real estate, business owner. You can actually put these keywords to block a contribution from coming into your account. They also help you recognize if you've already given your maximum. Some races, the maximum is $250 if you do business with the city, and it kind of already stops that from coming in so that you're not hit by saying you're taking all these, outsized large contributions. So because of the public financing, there's so many restrictions on the city level. on a state level, there was some recent legislation to close like the LLC loophole because all these LLCs were contributing. So you actually have to disclose like the ownership of an LLC and things like that. So there's been laws to really kind of get at that dark money, but it's really hard unless it's an independent expenditure, which you have no control at. As Yvette said, you can't, if you're controlling all your independent expenditures, you're gonna get fined, or you're gonna be prevented from collecting public money. Because this is me or you.
This is you, but we can do it together. As everything in life. So I think, the win number is what you want to figure out, right? And so we always say you have to figure out 50 plus 1. So if you go and look at what voter turnout was in previous elections, right? So say you live in a district and some districts have very, like, especially if it was a special election, they have very small turnout rates. So sometimes it can be like, it's only 5,000 people that came out and voted in a special election. And there are special elections that are decided by as small a universe as 5,000 people. And so you want to figure out I will say most city council districts on average have anywhere between 8 and 10,000 people that come out and vote. Sometimes you have higher numbers. You can say, oh, it's 14,000, 13.5, but it doesn't generally get much higher than that. So you want to look at that and make sure that you can get, if it's 10,000, you want to get 5,000 plus that 1% so that you get 51% of the vote. And so it's really helpful for people to target. And I always suggest polling to every candidate so that you know a little bit about where you stand and like what area. So this is by borough, this is a citywide one, but I think it's also helpful if you're a city council candidate to say, I'll just use my district, for example, District 35 in Brooklyn. You can say, okay, well, I know Fort Greene is, looking this way, but Prospect Heights, I may need to do a little bit more work in. Fort Greene tends to have more seniors in it, and Prospect Heights tends to have a little bit more newcomers in it. So you look at that polling and then say, okay, I want to target these X amount of people and figure out how do I get to that number. It's the 50 plus 1 that you're always, going for, and what's your strategy to get there. So Amelia, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
No, I also think like, we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'll piggyback on, if there's an area, I want to say there's seniors everywhere, but there's some neighborhoods that have really high concentration of seniors because of like really good senior housing. You may want to think about actually, having some type of platform so that you can actually speak with some kind of knowledge or plan on that issue, and using some of this data. It's not all about just how you feel in your stomach, but really having some targeted data and understanding of who's who in your district, whether it is a largely immigrant district. Although we did say that immigration is more of a federal issue, but there's a lot of local programs on the city level that, whether it's English as a second language classes or adult literacy, et cetera, like really having an understanding of the programs and having a plan or something to say about a targeted population within your district.
Absolutely. And the other thing that you want to have a plan on is opposition research, right? The research that you should be doing research on yourself, so you always know what it is that someone's going to come at you for. So if you know that, there's something in your past that you did, whether, you worked for an elected official. An example is there was a candidate who worked for an elected official who was very unpopular in the district. And then there were certain votes that were made that they're saying, oh, you know what? She helped to ensure that this vote was made for our district, and it hurt, land use and housing overall. So make sure you understand what it is that you want to be putting out there and what other people are going to be putting out there. So you can do a lot of targeted polling and targeting. But if you don't understand kind of the universe of what is being said or what is likely to be said about you. One other really good example that's probably something that people are very familiar with is Eric Adams in the most recent election. They were saying, oh, he doesn't live in the borough. You always have to make sure that you're catching what it is up front, very quickly. And always my thing is like, you want to put it out before someone else puts it out. So when you're doing also, and like, how important is that issue to people? So when you're doing your polling, not only are you polling, like, figuring out, oh, who's going to vote and who's going to turn out, but also what the issues are and the importance to them. Because some people are like, I don't care about that. He's been a great borough president. That means nothing to me. There's other people who are going to say, oh, that issue cares. I care deeply about that issue. So you want to do a lot of polling to understand where people fall on what on the issue, and how you can figure out a way to win them over.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would say to that is just not only just getting ahead of an issue or potential issue, it's just more about controlling your own narrative. You don't want anyone else to say anything about your experience. When my bio was read, I definitely worked for some high profile elected officials. However, I would want to control that narrative because I was able to do X, Y, and Z in those positions. But so really don't shy away. I would never recommend shying away from any type of experience, really controlling your narrative about some of the greatest takeaways that you learned in leadership, of whether it's things to do or whether it's things not to do.
So endorsements, it's very interesting is that a lot of people say endorsements are like old school way of doing politics. But if you look at the most recent election, endorsements still matter. Whether it's from an elected official, a lot of times it's great if the elected official in that district is super popular, to have them give you their endorsement means a ton. You can't underestimate it or undervalue it. It means a lot, because if they said, oh, you know what, Robert Cornegie in Brooklyn did a great job, and Robert Cornegie says, I'm going to endorse X person, that goes a long way because the trust factor is already there. Political parties, that means a lot to people too, whether it's the Working Family Party or a Democratic Socialist for America. All these different parties carry weight in the communities, and you have to do it. It's a long interview process, and you have to get the endorsement of folks. But it does carry weight when you go to the polls. I'll give you an example. I was with candidate Linda Lee in Queens on election day, and several unions had endorsed her. So it's like UFT had endorsed her, and CWA, which is Construction Workers for America. And so they have those different logos on the campaign material that they give out to them. And they were like, oh my gosh, UFT endorse you? I'm a teacher. And that means that's important to them. Or, DC 37 endorse you? My mom's a DC 37 employee. Believe it or not, a lot of people make up their mind about who they're going to vote for at the actual poll. They go, they get, they meet the candidate, they hear from them, and some of them make up their minds right then and there. One example I'm going to give you for media and press, if folks remember, and I'm happy to have you write in the chat, Catherine Garcia, the last few weeks of the campaign and the election cycle caught fire. The New York Times endorsed her, and you saw Catherine Garcia go from like a 5th, 6th place candidate to she rose up to like a 3rd place candidate, and then almost a 2nd place candidate. She was in the top 3 after that. So the New York Times endorsed her, and then the Daily News endorsed her, and you just saw her numbers grow and grow and grow, because the press has an influence. People are reading this. A lot of people trust the New York Times and the Daily News, City and State, different press outlets that people really trust. The other thing that people trust are influencers, whether it's a celebrity, now you see Cynthia Nixon, going and talking to people. You see celebrities going and talking to folks. You see what I always call like the mayors of the block going and talking to folks. There's always someone who has been on the block, who has lived there for, 3 generations. Their family's been there for 3 generations. And, they're like, my person is Shahana Hanif. I know her. I know her family. She's, she has good roots. She's going to get things done for us, as well as faith leaders. Faith leaders talk to hundreds and thousands of people every week, whether it's from the pulpit or at the synagogue. People talk all the time, and having faith leaders come out and support you you can't underestimate that or undervalue that as well. And so campaign endorsements, as you can see, like, people are always looking for them, but when you see the one that makes sense for you, you're like, oh, you know what, the 21 and 21, I know Yvette and Amelia, they would only endorse someone who's right for me. Or New York for Change, Communities for Change. It matters at the end of the day, and it's super important as anything else that goes on in the kind of the campaign cycle.
Yeah, I think it's a huge validator. You've been raising money, you understand the district that you're running in, you you have some great, colorful campaign literature to break through, and then you have some folks that are validating to say, like, yes, I stand behind Shahana. She's going to make a great city council member. And I think in addition to really validating the campaign, what happened, we're going to get into this, like, the next slide. Boots on the ground. Some of these organizations provide, boots on the ground, more times than not. Sometimes it is a coordinated, once you coordinate with the campaign, you can't go and do an independent expenditure, or you can't separate it. You can't coordinate it and separate. So, like, being very careful that you're not getting fined, but really having someone, support your campaign. Some unions may say, we're going to do stuff independently. We're going to do member to member about your race, and we're not going to send people to your campaign. But a lot of these things are really, getting the word out to the members that live within your districts. I know that there was a more recent one about the New York Times endorsement, but I know 8 years ago, or now 7 years ago, can't remember, 2013, when de Blasio was running, he got 2 really big endorsements early when he was polling down at like 8th place. And once he got New York Communities for Change, and then shortly thereafter was 1199, these 2 really big Central Brooklyn organizations. This is pre-ranked choice voting, where, really carrying Central Brooklyn will set you up on a good path to winning a citywide election. Those 2 really big endorsements really gave him some momentum, and people started taking it seriously. They're like, okay, he got those 2 endorsements. And then they started to, trickle, and his poll, took some more time, but his poll numbers started going up slowly.
So the press is one, like I just said, when the New York Times endorsed Catherine Garcia, the press is one of those things that worked 100 years ago and works now. Earned media is media that you are getting, whether it's an op-ed, which is an editorial that you write about something, or they're covering an event. So a lot of times people do events and rallies to get that earned media so that they can get their name out in the press. And a lot of times, like Lynn Schulman, who's one of the candidates for 21 and 21, she was really great about getting earned media. She wrote about her story. And that's what you want to be doing, is figuring out how to tell your story in a creative way. So she talked about her story about, getting breast cancer, and how she's working to overcome some of the challenges that come with that. And she put that in as to why it is that healthcare is a priority for her. She also talked about hospitals, and like not having hospitals in certain districts in Queens. And so the press would write about this a lot. And other people who you see, they learn, a lot of people are magicians with earned media, and some people, it takes a little bit more work to do it. But my thing I tell candidates all the time is make friends with all of the reporters. Figure out who the reporter is who's covering a beat. If it's a local newspaper, right? Because people still do read the Caribbean Life in Brooklyn. They still read the ethnic papers, OI and El Diario, that people still read all those things. And so to Jeff Colton, City and State, people read those things daily. And so making sure that your message is getting out is something that you want to do all the time. Social media, I will tell you, it's almost like it was something that interns did a couple of years ago, and now it's a professional kind of sport in politics. You need a person, because Twitter is very active. Now, mind you, Twitter is not always real life, but you do need people who are there to say, no, 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 that's not true. Or yes, yes, yes. So if you get every endorsement that you get, you want to go on social media. Every time that you get, an op-ed, you want to blast it on social media. Every single time that you go to a news conference or you have a rally, you want pictures. People right now, it's very much like they have a short attention span and they just see images and things and they want to see it quickly and digest it and move on to the next thing. So pictures of what you're doing, where you're at. Are you at a nursing home? Are you at a senior center? Are you, at a housing complex? Are you at a rally? Are you standing for the right things? People want to see that, and they're going to go to your social media to follow you and find out what it is that you're doing. And so you need a strong presence. And you also need to like acknowledge things like, say, for instance, if it's Juneteenth, you want to say, happy Juneteenth. If it's, Rosh Hashanah, you want to say happy Rosh Hashanah. You want to be hitting religious holidays. You want to be hitting, social holidays. You want to be hitting all of those marks, it's, happy Black History Month. And those things go on social media and they make a difference for people who are celebrating them or thinking about them. And digital media as well, because earned media is free. Social media can cost you a little bit. Digital media, on the other hand, and we'll get into a little bit more, but digital media is costly. If you want to do anything from advertising on Hulu and YouTube to television, it's going to cost you. To be on TV for almost about a week to 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks you can get out of it. It's about $1 million a week, which is why you only really see citywide campaigns doing that, because $1 million a week is a lot of money. But your television will be saturated with news and images of the candidate. But in citywide elections, it's absolutely worth it. You saw Ray McGuire, for instance, who had a lot of money very early on, who ran for mayor. He saturated the press and the media and TV with ads and information. Now you have to make sure that you do it the right way so that you are saturating it and making an impression, and also following up with the things like Hulu and YouTube. And so that every impression, every time someone, and you can target it, right? So every time you may open it up, if I'm a Black woman who's of a certain age, I'm not going to tell, but a Black woman of a certain age in a certain zip code, you may want to be hitting if you're the Black candidate. And you might want to say, I'm going to make sure every time she goes on Hulu, every time she goes onto her, Facebook page, she's seeing these ads. And I think Obama started it back in 2008, just a little bit, but now it is a thing that you cannot live without. I'll let Amelia add on.
No, I want to be conscious of the time. I know we probably have like a few more slides, Yvette. You want to,
Yeah,
did you want to play this video?
No, don't play the video. It's fine. I just was, to be conscious of time.
Oh, this is the most fun part of the voting. Direct voter contact. So if you are, I think local office, we can talk about state and federal as well. If you're running for a local office, meaning like a city council, there's a good chance you can knock on every eligible voter's door and it's been your campaign. The universes are usually pretty small, but if you, as they say, get on their doors every day, there's a good chance that you'll knock on every eligible voter door. Door knocking is probably, least favorite of a lot of people, but it's probably very most effective because you are directly talking to someone. Most people, I've done door knocking for many, many, many years, and I still love it.
She loves it. It's her favorite.
It is really a chance to, especially if someone engages with a conversation, you're very likely, especially if you're the candidate as well, to really convince someone, because it takes a lot of time and effort to knock on someone's door. You can pay for a mailer, but really having a 5 or 10 minute conversation is a lot of time invested. Mail and TV, Yvette just told you how much it costs to be on TV, and also like for local races, it usually doesn't make sense because you have some spending caps on some of these races. It just really doesn't make sense to put some money into that. There's always a lot of money on the federal level, because the area is a little bit bigger, and the geographically there's a lot of, it spans around large areas. You really have to figure out, when you're budgeting. I always, if you have if you look at percentage wise, if you're spending more money on like, consulting or anything else, I think the most money should be on direct voter engagement, because that's the thing that is going to turn into actual, people voting for you at the poll sites. So really understanding that the majority of your money needs to go towards that. I always tell people, don't hire anybody yet. Wait as the last moment to start staffing up, because if it's not really kicking off the ground, like petitioning hasn't started, you don't really need much overhead on the early set of your campaign. Grassroots organizing, coalition building, I think really figuring out who's in your tent, who are my endorsements, and having a real handle on what type of endorsement and support you're going to get. Okay, this person is merely just to, do like 1 or 2 big events, or this person is going to consistently send me 5 people every week, which is fine, because having like 5, candidates will prefer to have 5 people every single week than like something less, a mailer, to be quite honest. Really having consistent boots on the ground, because that's what people really remember. Oh, someone knocked on my door. They'll get 10 mailers and just gets lost in the shuffle, but really having that conversation. Oh yeah, someone did come here. Having your presence in a community is super, super important. People always are, less during the pandemic, but people are always grocery shopping. People are always going to a green market. People are always getting in the subway. My subway was super busy and packed this morning. I was like, New York is back. People are taking the subway. People are at the bus stops. People are dropping their kids off to school. So it doesn't make sense for you to go into an area that there's no high traffic. This one is less, likely they can or cannot be a registered voter if you're running in the local, but citywide. But really, door knocking. I emphasize that as an old Acorn organizer.
Like I said, it's her absolute favorite. We're supposed to go in teams. She always leaves me. But
because I want to knock on more doors.
She does. And I'm slower with it. But we have a good time, and we enjoy talking to people and again, community activities and events. I will tell you, the thing that people underestimate is the power of a block party. The block parties, the streets are cut off during the summer. And if you bring an elected official through those block parties for just an hour or even less, it makes such a difference, and people remember that kind of thing. But I know we're running short on time, so we'll go to the next slide. So this is very similar, days of action. And I think the really what you want to have is a surrogate. So, people always think of like President Obama or, somebody coming into town and saying, I'm going to do a rally, I'm going to do something with a candidate. It's just as important to have a, Barack Obama, but sometimes, like I said, the mayor of your block, the mayor of the, the district is super important as well, and making sure that you have your surrogates with you who are talking about you all the time. So I always like to tell candidates, make sure you get a surrogate who is, a champion, someone who's with the disability community, someone who's with the, health community, whether it's a nurse or someone who can validate your campaign and why you are important. And then make sure that you're doing a day of action around whether it's a holiday, or if it's not a holiday, not like 4th of July, but like, like if it's Black History Month, you're doing something like that, or Women's History Month, where you're saying, this is important, and I'm a woman, and I'm a candidate, and here's why I'm going to be the best candidate to serve your interests well, because I'm thinking about childcare and healthcare differently than any other candidate. Town halls, a lot of churches still do them. A lot of old school political clubs still do them, where you will come and people will ask questions and you'll get answers. And again, it's a way, door knocking is helpful, but having an event where everybody in the room may be thinking the same question, it's the opportunity to have that answered where everybody is in the room at the same time. And they tend to be from the same kind of ideology or thinking. and rallies as well. You want to make sure how many, I ran into so many different rallies during the summer. I can't even tell you, like I'm walking down the street, I'm like, oh, there's a rally over here. Rallies are really important to just continue getting your message out, have people see you, have people know that you're active and you're involved and that you care about the issue. And then we love to get out the vote, Amelia and I. We make sure that there are boots on the ground. So on like the week or two leading up to the election day, you want to make sure that you have every union, every faith-based group, every group that's endorsed you, every elected official going and knocking on doors, doing the rallies, talking your name up, because it's go time. There's no more, on election day, like I said, so many people make up their minds at the polls. And I can't even tell you the amount of candidates that I've stood with right outside the poll and said, you know what, do you know who you're going to vote for? And they say, I want to know more about this. And you give them that and they come out and they say, I just voted for you. Thank you for that information. Now, mind you, it's not always 100% that they did that, but I think it makes a big difference a lot of times to see you at the poll and ask you those last minute questions. So you want to have representatives who are there giving out information saying, Amelia Adams is the best candidate because she's going to do these things for you. And people are swayed a lot of times standing right there outside the polls.
Yeah, and I would say we definitely had a lot of fun. This was in Queens for Sylvie and I. We Yvette alluded to this earlier. I went into depth about like targeting and your win number. So throughout the campaign, you've been IDing folks, the folks who said, yes, I'm going to vote for you. Absolutely. You're going to be pulling them and you can't stop, I don't want to say harassing because it's not a good word, but really reminding them to vote. People always say, if you call me again, I'm not going to vote. That's not true because they're in that system because they always vote. So really making sure you pull them until they voted. You told me yesterday you were going to vote on this in the morning. Did you vote yet? Call them in the afternoon. Did you vote yet? Really making sure that you pull your IDs until they actually do vote. GOTV used to just be the weekend before the election day, but now since early voting, you have 9 days to vote early. There's early voting actually is happening right now up until Sunday. So you can actually vote at various locations. So people started doing GOTV earlier so that you just have this a longer time to just keep reminding people. And some people forget that it's election day. When they wake up, like, oh yeah, I missed early voting, but you can actually vote today. And just having that constant visibility, whether it's like posters in people's windows, you got to be careful because if you put your signs places that you're not supposed to, you can get a fine from sanitation. So just really being cognizant of those rules and just constantly reminding people today's the last day of early voting, E-Day, etc.
Yeah, and just make sure again, visibility in social media. You cannot these days do an election without making sure people see you on when they on Twitter, on social media, and digitally. So that really concludes our presentation, and we're so thankful that you guys stayed and listened, and would like to open it up to questions.
Thank you both so much. That was a amazing presentation and I learned a lot. I've never seen Get Out the Vote look so fun. I just want to remind everyone who's on, please enter your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But I'm going to start with some questions that folks have already submitted. The first one is, excuse me, how much energy should you spend on likely versus undecided voters?
I think equal, to be honest. You need to, every vote counts, in especially in a ranked choice, and even like these state races are getting decided by fewer and fewer votes. You really have to keep IDing, going back to the folks who are on the fence. And it shows that your campaign is consistently trying to reach out to people. I've seen, at the beginning of a campaign, this technology is amazing. Minivan is a thing now. old school used to go with clipboards and paper and markers and stuff like that, and had a map and really got lost. But minivan really gives you a sense of like, I had this conversation with someone 2 months ago. They had no idea it was an election this year. They were undecided. A month later, they were likely, and then they're turned a full supporter because they probably, saw the candidate, at their kid's school. That has happened so many times. Like, oh, I met, I knocked doors for Crystal Hudson one time. They're like, she was at my daughter's school. I really liked her energy. And, I was undecided, but I'm, fully all on board. I'm Team Crystal now. So it works because it also just shows you that you are a consistent person and you're going to always show up for them when they're representing. You want to come off as being very accessible and that you really care.
Yeah, just to add really quickly is that you never want to take your base you don't want to say, oh, my base is these people and they're likely because they're Black women voters, and so they're likely to be with me. You never want to take them for granted. You always want to make sure that you're pushing to the next level so that they know I'm your candidate and this is why. And even though they may be a likely voter, you just can't take them for granted. So I spend as much time on likely voters as I do on undecided as well.
Got it. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Next question we received from folks who registered was, with apathy setting in during off-election years, how do you advise campaigns to engage voters when it isn't a presidential election? So either of you, please feel free.
Well, I think it's so funny because I do a lot of these civic engagement things, and I always say if you go out your house, 3 days, 4 days in a row, and the garbage is piling up, that is a local issue. You need to understand who is in charge of making sure that garbage is picked up, and it's not the president.
That's exactly right. Right. You always want to be, I tell elected officials once they get in office, I say, still do town halls, still do events so that people are seeing you, not because people, oh, I just see them when it's election time. No, you have to be out in the field and put it on your calendar so that it doesn't get lost. Put it on every month that you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And so that you're always ensuring that people see you and you're getting people to know you even better and have access to you. Because that's what people really want, is that access.
Got it. Okay. Another question. From your perspectives as Black women engaging voters across diverse identities and issues, have you experienced any unique challenges or advantages in this?
I think people tend to think of Black women as a monolithic, right? It's like they're all thinking the same, they're all going to vote the same, and a lot of it is generational, and a lot of it is cultural, right? Like in Black, I mean, this can go on to a whole bunch of things, but like you have Caribbean Americans, you have Black Americans, you have different kinds of people who are thinking very differently about a lot of different issues, and so I say I'm of a certain generation. I'm a Gen Xer, no shame in my game. But I find that a lot of people now who are younger, they tend to be more progressive. And I always said we were the first progressives. We just became parents and old, and so now we're more moderate. But a lot more are more progressive now than we've seen in a lot of years in prior. And so we can't think of Black women in particular as just being like all the same, monolithic, they're all going to vote down the ballot line the same way. You have to really be talking to the different audiences and understanding them and what their concerns and their issues are and speaking to those.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a trend that we have been seeing, like Black women winning in non-traditionally African-American heavy districts. We saw that with Congresswoman Underwood. District is majority. It's like a part rural area, and we have mayors of large cities that are women now, especially Black women. And I think the messaging, really just focusing on issues and not really like identity has been something that talking to a lot of the women and really leading from a place that they have like a core value that they're not willing to compromise, and just being unapologetic about that, and not really pandering to whatever the trend is really saying, this is what my belief is, and I'm going to make the best decision. And I think generally, not just Black women, I feel like women lead differently than male counterparts, and really, Yvette said, I steal this from Yvette because she is a mom. I don't have children, but really, whether the woman is a mom, but also usually someone who is taking care of elderly parents, or usually had been kind of like the caretaker of siblings and things like that, just coming from a different perspective, really seeing the issue, not just from an individual, but a child, an elderly parent, or et cetera, really having that holistic view of how to lead and what's the best interest of a constituency or district, excuse me.
Thank you both for that. That really resonates. I'm going to jump to a question from the chat because I know we only have a few more minutes. This person asks, can you speak to the dangers of creating and or being in an echo chamber to get people from different parties to vote for you in the general election? So I guess maybe breaking through.
Gosh, that's a great question, because a lot of people really and truly do look at social media. They, the people, like, I surround myself with like-minded people, right? So, if Crystal Hudson is like a great candidate, I'm like, oh, my girlfriends are saying she's a great candidate. These people are saying that she's a great candidate. All my, the parents, my school are saying she's a great candidate. It's because, right, it is an echo chamber. So what I think you have to do is, a lot of times, is polling and targeting and figuring out who are the people who that's not resonating with, why, what are the naysayers saying, and kind of really get out of your comfort zone and figure out what other parts of the district, because you can just be in Fort Greene and just talking to people right here, but then there's a whole other part of the district that's not being seen or heard, and you can still get to your win number, right? Like, don't get me wrong, you can still get to your win number, but then half the district is not pleased with you, and then they're going to be the people who vote you out. So I think you have to always be pushing and engaging and going to places that maybe you're not as comfortable with. I always tell folks, if you're the defund police person, make sure that you go to households of people, especially elderly Black people, to say, why is it that you're not for defund the police, and why do you feel like you need more police in your community? Understand those issues first and foremost, and then bring that back so that you can then hear what that is and make a more informed message that it's hitting other people in a very different way.
And I think the last thing, I know we have 2 minutes left. The one thing that I've seen, which was really a good idea, a couple of candidates who won their primary, is actually they bought in the folks who actually were also running in the same race, their colleagues that were in the race as well that didn't win during the primary, to kind of like build that coalition, because you need people who were, they have their own basis of support. They just weren't victorious in the primary. And it really just shows that you're making a good effort to, it's one thing to win the election, but you need to govern and not have like, people that are always constantly making your job hard. And I would, Yvette mentioned like continue having town halls, bring in folks who were very antagonistic against you. And, sometimes it's just hard and they won't, come to the table, but really having them say like, you are a part of this community. I don't want to say reward bad behavior, but really making it understand what their issues are. If it's not just personal, if it's like a legit reason that they are a viewpoint, really bringing them into the table and having, because you need to govern as well, like having some type of, I don't want to say it's a committee or, maybe they help you with these town halls, bring folks from your crew to actually sit in this town hall so that we can figure out the best way forward.
Thank you both so much. I think I'm going to stop it here and hand the floor back over to the ABNY team. It's been a delight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for moderating, and Amelia and Yvette. I can't thank you enough. This was wonderful, and I learned so much. I was furiously taking notes while I was on mute, and I really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you so much. Everyone, just a quick reminder, I know it was mentioned, but early voting is open, so get out, find your poll site, and you could vote up to and including November 2nd, which is, I think early voting ends the 31st, but then November 2nd is election day. So get out there. It's important to vote. And thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. This was a pleasure. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.